I'm Joe Braga, and I'm pleased to lead this discussion here. Today, we're going to explore the topic of 5G. I think most have heard the hype and promise around 5G. It's multi-gigabit speed, ultra-low latency. Now it's time for the practical solutions that are reliable, secure, and simple to integrate so that it can be incorporated into products and effectively start changing the landscape of enterprise and industry. So enterprise industry, manufacturing industry 4.0 are looking to unlock the potential of 5G with the significant benefits that create the unprecedented avalanche of opportunities for business innovation. I'm here today with Tellus Marco Contento, the VP of 5G Technologies. Hi, Marco.
Hi, Joe.
So Marco, tell me, how does 5G overcome all the hype?
After the big hype that we have seen in the past 2 years around 5G, of course, we have to look at the reality. And we cannot expect that the 5G would bring all the promises that since the day one. But for sure, we will see all those, let's say, promises coming step by step. We have to say that 5G initially will accommodate the needs of the broadband connectivity in several flavors. We all know that the one big market that is essentially driving everything is the mobile handset market. But in parallel of that, there is also there are interesting opportunities around the fixed wireless access. And with this definition, we include all the application use cases, let me say, so where we can essentially leverage the potential of 5G in terms of throughput in particular, but also capacity to somehow replace, in some cases, the landlines, so either fiber, XDSL, or things like that, where there is, for instance, no possibility, or it is not convenient to bring the landlines on specific, let's say, premises or house and so on. So in all those cases, 5G can be used as a broadband connectivity to access internet for the household or enterprises. There are, of course, also other peculiar situation where the wireless connectivity, in particular 5G, can be used combined with the landlines in order to achieve even more throughput, or to use wireless as a backup for the landline. So essentially, the first 5G wave, let me say, even if they call it phase one, will have to accommodate all these new cases. Anyhow, there are also additional features and capability you mentioned before, low latency and things like that, that are quite relevant and will be part of the phase 2 or second wave, and will be really relevant for enterprises when we talk about the use of 5G technology in a different environment, like as we said, in the enterprise, and in particular with the purpose to let me say, again, to replace the landlines, in this case the cables, because as today, I mean, the technology that is dominant in those places are essentially cable technology based on several protocols adopted by the industries, like Profinet, I mean, also others, I mean, so there is a lot of expectation from 5G to use this technology in those places. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, there is also in some countries also they have allocated part of the spectrum in order to enable those industries to use a specific wireless technology. So what we see now is enterprises starting to trial 5G for these purposes, and of course we will see the adoption in let's say in volume not before 2-3 years. So we cannot expect this will happen from the day one. Also for the reason that as we said before, I mean, we are in the first wave, so we see 5G compliant to the first specification, the release 15, that does not bring all the features that are expected, but this will come with the next release, the release 16, that has been released this year. So we'll need some time to see the chipset and product certified also able to support such new use cases.
Very good. So you mentioned briefly, you touched on spectrum, and this is of course, a big change for 5G. Talk to me a little bit about the 5G spectrum and how networks are managing the way forward with the new spectrum there.
Yeah, sure. Spectrum, yes, it's a big challenge because at the end, in order to deliver more throughput, but also to support more capacity, there is a need to have more spectrum. I mean, spectrum is something that is controlled by the specific organization, and the carriers currently are using the spectrum they have acquired for the current technology that somehow we can define as a legacy technology like 3G, 4G, and so on. But anyhow, going ahead, in order to provide more throughput, they need more spectrum. So there are a lot of initiatives or efforts, let me say, in this specific area. On one side, there is the possibility to use or reuse the spectrum that has been already allocated in legacy technologies, like in 4G. So we see that there is what they call refarming, so the possibility to reuse the same band that so far has been used by 3G, 4G, also for 5G. So we talk about spectrum refarming. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, there are some, let's say, some challenges over there because the carriers also to manage the legacy devices. I mean, if there is a user with a 4G device, of course, there is still the need to provide service to that user. Mm-hmm. And therefore, in this case, there is one feature that comes or can help, which is the dynamic spectrum sharing. So the possibility to use the same bands and allocate either 4G or 5G dynamically, depending on the number of the users and things like that. And there is also some initiatives to add more spectrum, in particular on frequency bands still below sub-6, so below 6 gigahertz. Mm-hmm. And we can mention here that new bands, sometimes also overlapping on LTE bands, have been allocated and refer to band 77, 78, and 79 that are in a mid-high spectrum, so usually around 3.5 gigahertz or also around 5 gigahertz. Because you can, we all know as engineers that the more spectrum we have, the more throughput we can achieve. That's the target. So in those pieces of spectrum, we can have several hundred of megahertz available. So I can easily achieve more throughput. Also leveraging the fact that in 5G, in particular in sub-6 bands, we can have channels with a bandwidth that is up to 100 megahertz. That was not possible with LTE before. Mm-hmm. And LTE, I remind you all that with LTE only maximum allowed was 20 megahertz, still with the possibility to combine carrier, of course. Mm-hmm. And then the big news in 5G are the new bands or the new spectrum that has been allocated, in particular in the millimeter wave spectrum, which is essentially frequency above 24 gigahertz. That brings, of course, a lot of challenges, in particular for the coverage. Mm-hmm. So in the spectrum, in the millimeter wave spectrum, of course, we can have even more bandwidth because we can easily have 1 gigahertz of spectrum available. And we can combine more carriers. And currently, the technology available in terms of devices and chipset is that we can have up to 800 megahertz of spectrum, so we can achieve several gigabit of throughput. Mm-hmm. Of course, on the other side, there are some, let's say challenges, and in particular when we come to coverage. Mm-hmm. That of course we talk about line of sight coverage. At the end, the coverage is not big as we can have in spectrum like below 1 gigahertz for sure. Yeah. But this help in specific situation, so to provide coverage and capacity, throughput and capacity in peculiar situation like in shopping malls or stadium, things like that. So we can offload the traffic from the current legacy LTE technology. Mm-hmm. Here we should open brackets to discuss or to explain the type of deployments. I mean, the non-standalone deployments. So these are essentially going back to the spectrum. I mean, the millimeter wave spectrum is something that really bring the news in terms of capability or throughput and performances. Let me say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about the effect of things like rain and water content in the air and the propagation of millimeter
Absolutely.
wave. So yes,
Absolutely.
very much a technology that will develop very specific use cases as 5G goes forward. Speaking of that, let's talk about the applications that 5G is already driving and how it will that changes over time as you see new features and these of 5G come on.
Yeah, sure. But let's say that aside the use cases or applications that somehow we already know, like handset or router and gateway, that somehow we have already seen with the LTE technology, the 5G will enable new interesting use cases, in particular when we look at the new features that 5G will bring.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before low latency communication or mission critical communications or massive IoT, things like that. We so far we have mentioned this new and nice capability without also mentioning the news that at the network level we will see, and in particular when we look at the architecture that 5G will bring, and in particular the service-based architecture, where essentially the network will be implemented such that there will be virtual slices running on the same hardware, essentially. This is in simple word, that will allow to deliver different quality of services depending on the use case. Of course, looking at this particular capability, we can imagine that we can enable particular or new use cases compared to the past. When we mentioned before also the private networks for manufacturing the segment, yes, that's an important part, because in that case, when we look at systems that require low latency communication or ultra reliable low latency communication, we can think that 5G will help to somehow migrate the current configuration or the current implementation from a land, let's say, I mean, from a wired approach to a wireless applications. That's the important part. Not only that, of course, because there are also new use cases using augmented reality, virtual reality, and also in all those use cases that there is the need to support low latency communication. Aside of that, there is a lot of, let's say, noise or rumor in the market talking about MEC, so multi-edge computing. That is also something that will leverage or will enable additional use cases. Of course, nothing comes from free. There are also other aspects like security aspect that we have to fulfill, because the architecture is quite new. So, and in 5G they have taken consideration since the beginning. So security is developed natively since the beginning, or since they started to define the 5G architecture.
No, very absolutely. Now, brings to an interesting question here. So what we're talking about here is a very different scenario from, let's say, the transition between 3G and 4G. So how do you see adopters and enterprises needing to prepare for 5G and the transition from 4G? It looks and feels very different.
Yeah, and in particular, one important aspect to consider to start investigating is surely to understand in the country those customers have the intention to deploy, to understand exactly what are the roadmap of the carriers when they're going to adopt, because this is very much depending on the region and carriers. We have seen so far different trends in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, depending on the country. And when I refer to this, I refer to the fact of what type of architecture deployment they are going to adopt, whether it is non-standalone or standalone. Usually the majority of them are deploying non-standalone, but there are some cases they are looking for standalone. And in particular, when we come to private network, which is a different, let's say, scenario. The other aspect is to consider is also the certification aspect. That is something really relevant. 5G is bringing also a lot of complexity in terms of testing and to achieve the certification, not only at the module level, that is something that we are facing, but also on the final device, and in particular when we consider millimeter wave, because at the end, the certification including for a device including millimeter wave is something much more complex that we as Telit have to approach along with the customer, because the designing of the millimeter wave antenna is something that will impact the final design and also the final certification of the final device. Other aspects to consider are what kind of use case or application the customer is going to deploy. This is also a key element of discussion, and in particular regarding the choice of the let me say the specification of the product, whether can be or whether the device has to be or support LTE and 5G sub-6 bands only, or whether they need to support also millimeter wave, whether it is fixed or whether it is mobile application. So it depends very much by the use case or application that the customer need to deploy.
No, absolutely. So you mentioned, a lot of solution components there that obviously bridge not only hardware but the service in the infrastructure side of 5G needing to come together for a solution. So looking at that, what do you think distinguishes Tellus from other 5G providers in the ecosystem?
Well, surely providing only the hardware, the module that we are designing supporting 5G technology is not enough. Along with it, of course, there is the need to provide also some expertise to the customers, and in particular when we come to the capability to certify the module itself, but not only, also to help the customer in the certification activity of the final application. And here we come to the technical support or application engineer support that we have in-house, and to guide the customer in this process, and also the capability to do the design review. And even more important here, when we look at the millimeter wave, which is really the game changer, and really challenging when we have to look at the certification. The other aspects are the possibility, for instance, to bundle the product with other components, and last but not less important for sure is our capability to somehow connect the device to the portal at the end. 5G itself is not enough as a radio technology, but there is also the need, but also the tendency to provide the full connectivity, the device connected to the platform, and provide the capability to do device management, the capability to collect data from the device, in particular when there is a situation when the service provider is going to manage a specific, say, group of devices that is deployed in the field, and there is the need to monitor what's going on, and in particular when we look at the way, which is a really challenging stuff.
No, absolutely. So what's clear here is that 5G is a technology that changes everything as it continues to roll out. Companies and solution providers are going to require new skills, new perspective on bringing together solutions, and a lot is going to change. As you mentioned, factory automation, the whole concept of Industry 4.0, the intersection of low latency with slicing in private 5G. And all that, playing an amazing role in changing the landscape of how manufacturing goes on into the new decade. Human communications with virtual reality, telepresence, and a lot of other things. So definitely IoT will develop rapidly everywhere because we're looking at 5G rolling out at neck-breaking speeds. So the point here thank you, Marco, for making it, and is that going it alone is going to be complicated, and right. I mean integrating 5G into solutions is going to require a solution provider that's a true partner going forward. Companies like Tellus have the ability, as Marco outlined. So let's continue forward with that partnership. Strengthening it as Marcos's group continue to bring new additional solution components to market. Marco, any final remarks from you?
But my remark is that 5G is really a fascinating technology, and so I really look forward to see what will be the other let's say evolutions that are coming and are in front of our road. I mean, release 15 is the first milestone, and we see a lot of traction for that, but there is still a lot of expectation for the coming releases and new chipsets that are coming, so new products and also use cases that that product will enable. So stay with us, stay tuned, and you will have more updates from us what will be the evolution of our roadmap of products.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Marco, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.